How are we going to tell Black kids that we're not going to hire teachers that look like you anymore? How are we going to tell our Indigenous kids, we're not going to talk about your history anymore. We're just going to talk about these kids' histories because your history doesn't count. How are we going to traumatize an entire generation of children in Minnesota so that we can uphold this anti-DEI ridiculousness coming out of the federal government? We're going to traumatize children. We're going to dehumanize children all over the country because of this. So when we ask, what's the next step? How are we going to comply with federal orders? The question is, how are we going to dehumanize and traumatize children? How do we do that tactfully?
Republicans would love to pretend that what is happening at the federal government isn't happening, but it is. And every single American, every single Minnesotan is experiencing this terror right now. We have some conversations in the state of Minnesota, and they started in 2010 when Governor Dayton ran on an explicit promise to raise taxes on the wealthiest to pay back our schools. And in a time when people were trending right, we elected him to do that. Minnesotans value our quality public education. And so if we want to have detailed conversations about what's the best way to construct a cell phone policy, we work with districts to do that. The thing we're not working with districts on in the state of Minnesota is how can you cut 10% of your budget because the federal government can't function anymore because an unelected billionaire and his college minions hostily took over the Treasury Department. That's not a conversation we're prepared to have with districts. And so they want to focus on mandates because they don't realize that all laws are mandates, and they're not interested in public schools existing. They're interested in siphoning off public money to go to private religious schools so they can defund schools for kids of color. That is what they're genuinely interested in. And so it's a disingenuous argument that they make to undermine public schools, people who send their kids to public schools, and the students who attend those schools.
I'm here as a parent of an 11th grader in Minneapolis Public Schools, a school district that I hear on the doors wants stability. This chaos agenda is undermining the stability that we need and that we must have. Kids need in the classroom the same teacher year after year. This is going to cause our schools to go, all right, I may not be able to bring that teacher back. We must be able to maintain and retain teachers and staff to ensure we have stability in the classrooms, to ensure that we have stability for our students, especially our teachers and staff of color. That's what reflects my community. That's what reflects our communities around Minnesota. And this is going to undermine that and will cause our students to have worse results. So I echo Senator Gustafson's call. Please remind all policymakers what these cuts will cause.
Last week, I believe Republicans held a press conference in this same room, and they talked about teacher shortages and how they needed more money for things like just school infrastructure. Really hard to take that argument seriously when the next week they sit in our Education Finance Committee and they nod along as we list all of the things that Trump's administration is doing to our schools. If we have our superintendents, and many represent their own districts, who are begging for just 2% extra on the formula, and they're begging for 2% on the formula, and the Republicans are saying it's no big deal to cut 10% of the entire budget. So it just doesn't add up. And you start to wonder, is the fight for education with them just a political talking point? Because the numbers don't add up. We're here fighting for every single dollar that our kids deserve, and they're just nodding along as these executive orders just dismantle an entire education budget. It's just been nothing but chaos. And to say that we are panicking for no reason when every day you never know what's going to come out of Washington, D.C., makes it hard for our school districts to plan for the future. And that's really what it is. It just comes down, school districts are like little mini towns, and they have to balance a budget too. And it's really hard to do that when you can't count on where the funding is coming from. So that's what we're asking for. We're asking them to join us in the fight so we can provide some stability to our school districts in all parts of Minnesota.